in the West, in America, because America is so often the aggressor, war is muted. And you may see the pictures of the men, like yearbook photos. Not the picture of their wounds, not the pictures of their innards, not the pictures of eye stalks hanging down cheeks, not the pictures of cratered faces, not the pictures of split limbs, not the pictures of men staggering into a shallow grave holding their own goddamn intestines. You don't see that. You see it sanitized. You see it cleaned up. You see it airbrushed. You see men in their prime, not when they have become meat. But that's not what the rest of the world sees, you understand? The rest of the world sees what it is. They see the women cradling the severed heads of their children. They see the children of Fallujah genetically destroyed through horrifying weapons. They see shattered, splayed bodies. They see a wedding party blown into horrifying stucco Picasso wall paintings of death. They see what it is as if you're there, and we see the sentimental view of what it looks like in sadness, and they see what it viscerally feels like in horror and rage. War cannot be contained within the minds of propagandists anymore. War is visceral. War is in your face forever. War is shareable like that. Having people who took movies and people who took photographs in Vietnam was one of the things that ended the resolve of the war. War has become increasingly brutal because in the Second World War, for instance, only a minority of American soldiers ever even fired their weapons. A lot of people ran and hid. It is not in our nature. It is not in the nature of most human beings to stand in front of another human being, to aim down a sight, to pull the trigger and to dissolve their memories into red mist. It is not in the nature of a human being to want to blow someone's head off and watch their arterial spurting, falling torso plummet into the mud and twitch. It is not in our nature. There is a small minority of people, for want of a better word, who love it, who live for it. And a day where you don't get to slaughter someone, preferably with your bare hands, is a day that's barely worth getting out of bed for. But that is a very small minority of people. And I've always been asked, what do we do with these people in a free society? I'm not exactly sure, but I've got a good place to start. How about we stop giving them armies? Is that a place? How about we stop giving them weapons of mass destruction, fiat currency to fund their bloodlust and fuel their human disassembly lines? How about we just stop giving them planet-ending weaponry? It's just a thought, just a possibility. It is not in human beings' nature to wish to slaughter each other. It is almost universally true. I have traveled very many places in the world. Just about everyone I meet is quite nice. I'm quite nice, but just about everyone I meet is quite nice. And friendly and positive. Especially, you're a parent, you're having fun with your kids. People are nice. And in the past, it was hard. Like when the knights were trained, then they fought. The peasants didn't fight so much because they were just kind of conscripted or enlisted and drafted, and they had to fight. And then in the Second World War, the majority of soldiers did not fire their weapons, did not engage in combat. And the army recognized this as a huge problem and began to do the savage kind of basic training that you see depicted in movies like Full Metal Jacket. That kind of savage training occurred because the army was falling apart. Because the level of brutality and the length of brutality and the youth of the soldiers, particularly in Vietnam, was unsustainable. So they knew they had to dehumanize people to the point where they're willing to kill. In higher numbers than occurred in World War II. Well, why was the post-World War II era, the baby boomer era, different from the post-Vietnam era? Because most of the soldiers who came home had not killed anyone. It's Lord of the Flies, right? The writer says, a spear is a stick sharpened at both ends. You put it in someone else, it goes through you. War cannot be contained. It breaks out of the fray. And if you've ever seen true violence up close, I remember being a little boy in England, hearing a horrible crunching, ripping, metallic sound, running up to the street near the flats where I lived, and they were pulling a woman from a car wreck. The car had flipped. They were pulling a woman out, and she was shredded. And I was distant, and it's befogged by memory. But if you've ever seen true violence up close, it is visceral. You understand your body and your brain reacts like you're there. Like you're there. Our bodies haven't figured out screens yet. They haven't figured out that all stimuli is not immediate. That's why people like porn, I guess. They haven't figured out that it's just a screen. And when you see this visceral kind of damage, this tearing apart, this shredding, this aftermath, this panning across the flattened, bloody, half-human leftovers of the savage meal of metalry known as war. It's like you're there. It's like it's your family. People respond to it in a visceral way, and everyone knows that, which is why you in the West don't see the wounds, don't see the bodies, don't see the victims. But everyone else in the world, they do. And it hits them hard. And it makes them angry. And in our cud-like, chewing, cow-like, complacent way, we don't see what we are sowing, what we are sowing, what we are sowing every time, as they did 100,000 times during Obama's reign. The bombs fall primarily in the Middle East. Invade everyone, invite everyone. Not only can war no longer be contained in mythology, war cannot be contained in borders, because the West, in its infinite, programmed, dissolute wisdom, has decided to open the floodgates. Western Europe, Canada, America have decided to open the floodgates. We bomb, we attack, we dismantle, we destroy. And the images of this spread far and wide, inflaming the passions of those who see these images repeatedly, and then those people come wandering and snarling into our countries. You could not design the disassembly of a civilization with more robotic precision if you tried. We must stop. We must stop. The great fear that I had, and I remember this, and it wasn't until a lot later that I realized just the lefty propaganda that it all was, but nonetheless, when films like The Day After came out, I was a teenager in my mid-teens, if I remember right. No, I was in high school. There was one that was The Day After, and then there's one that went on, I think, for like 7 years, and this was about what happens right after a nuclear strike. And yes, it was designed to neuter the West's assertiveness when it came to confronting the Soviets, and it was a bunch of lefty propaganda. But what did I know at the time? At the time, I remember sitting with a friend of mine's brother watching, I think it was the one about 7 years. No, it was The Day After. It was The Day After. And I felt such a horrendous sense of violation and helplessness. Of helplessness. Like I was just a fish in a tank. And they could turn the water that surrounded me to fire anytime they wanted. I couldn't prevent it. I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't say anything about it. And any protest I might have the moment of would vanish in a nuclear wind. I would be a shadow on a wall. Unidentified, unidentifiable. And who would even bother to try and identify me? I would be baked into a radioactive wasteland for 1,000 years. Nothing of me would remain. Not my work, not my writing, my thoughts, my friendships, my loves, my hates, my passions. Nothing would remain. I could be microwaved into less than a ghost in less than a moment's notice. And that is a horrifying feeling of helplessness. And don't we all feel this right now? We do, right? We feel this. We feel this. Americans, you have to feel this. All of you who voted for what? No. No more war. The longest war in American history. Afghanistan, 17 years. For what? Can't even say for nothing. For nothing would be you go to a casino and you walk out wearing a barrel. This is for sowing the seeds of the destruction of the future and throwing a bladed boomerang that decapitates your children. But you voted for Trump, for a wall, for the prosecution of Hillary and company, and for no more useless wars. And what war recently has not been useless? Do you feel helpless, right? This is the feeling. You know, that you eat well and you exercise. You take care of yourself. And you try to get good sleep. And you floss. For what? So that some jerk 2,000 miles away can push a button. And all of your hard work and all of your care and all of your self-improvement becomes a shadow that someone with a wire brush scrubs off a crumbling wall 1,000 years from now, not having any idea whether it was you or a palm tree whose residue they're cleaning. We don't even have the dignity of the people from Pompeii, the ancient city that was buried in volcanic ash, where they found people masturbating and having sex and eating food and shopping, and they found at least the outlines of the people and they could tell what they were doing. We won't even have that. And those who weigh 300 pounds will last 1/1,000,000th of a second longer than those who weigh 150 pounds. And then we're turned into soap and dust and nothingness. And we can't do anything about it. What can we do? We can't boycott. Our taxes are taken from us against their will. And if we don't pay taxes, they just print the money or borrow money. They create the money out of thin air. They're like Aragorn. Go get a ghost army. They could just go get ghost money to pay for their real army. Creating the backlash. Invade everybody, invite everybody. And I hate this helplessness. I make sure my daughter brushes her teeth and stays safe and learns geography and for what? For what? And for what? It has to stop. You know, I don't even know how to appeal to the leaders. If this I don't even know what to say, because whether quickly or slowly, what we have, if we keep waging these wars, is going to end. And I'm not going to actually blame the people who come into our country seeking to end our way of life, because our way of life is directly threatening them. You know, we Western Europeans and North Americans, we're the ones with the nuclear weapons and the trigger-happy leaders and the massive resources to wage war seemingly ad infinitum. The death count that raises almost to the sky. So the fact that other cultures fear and hate us, well, of course they do. Wouldn't you? Don't you? This has to stop. This has to stop. And I say this to you, President Donald J. Trump. I hate the fact that it comes down to one man, but you are the commander-in-chief. I hate the fact that it comes down to one man. Such a burden should never rest on any one person's shoulders, or any 1,000 people's shoulders for that matter. But right now, given the way things are, it comes down to one man, and that man is you. And you alone have the power to say yes to the war or no to the war. Now, if you've got to feed a few bits of hot shrapnel for the murder fetishes of the generals around you, sure, go pound some sand. Go throw up a couple of plumes of camel shit and sand dust. I don't care. Hit an empty building. Say, ooh, look, we did something. It's not great, but it worked last year. Why not again this year? Because if, like, this war is terrible enough, and the people in Syria who are going to suffer is terrible enough, and the migrant wave is terrible enough, and the dissolution of the West is terrible enough. But what does matter is that the people who voted for you handed you the kind of trust and sacrifice that has not been seen in the modern world. They were warriors and soldiers for you, and they burnt friendships, and they burnt marriages, and they burnt jobs, and they burnt prospects, and they burnt careers, and they burnt credibility, and they have suffered to give you the power to stop these wars. And I'm sure they don't mind the tax cuts, but that's not what it's about. And the tax cut, combined with a $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill that you signed, is just a little bit less than compelling. Don't give me a raise and triple the raise in liabilities. I can count. So forget all of that. They wanted you to control immigration. Okay. That's a bit of a longer term plan. But right now, literally this moment in history, it comes down to you. It comes down to you saying thumbs up or thumbs down. Like the Romans in the ancient times, but Western civilization is in the amphitheater, in the Colosseum with the lion. It's up to you. And if you fail, if you say yes, if you thumbs up the end of everything, which it will be, quickly or slowly, and who knows which is better, then what happens is everyone deserts you who's got any decency. I'm just, don't shoot the messenger. It's just the way that it is. There are a lot of people you lured out of the woodwork, a lot of people who said war cannot be stopped. The media is too powerful, academia is too powerful, Hollywood is too powerful, the deep state is too powerful, the military-industrial complex is too powerful. If voting changed anything, they would have made it illegal a long time ago. It's a symbol that further ties you into obedience to the powers that be. Well, you voted, so now you got to obey. Or if your vote means nothing, why bother voting? Then at least you're not part of the problem because you're not sanctifying something that seeks to destroy you. And those people that you lured out of the woodwork, that you lured back into political action, well, those people, if you fail them now, and what they want is no more war, if you fail them now, they will not come back. They will not come back. Not peacefully, anyway, in the long run. It's what I believe in Europe as well. The reason why it's important for European leaders to start controlling their borders is either you do it or the population's going to do it by making those countries less hospitable for migrants to come to. In one way or another. It's going to happen. It'd be much better to happen peacefully. So those people aren't coming back if you betray them and launch another war. They will know then that if you can't do it, it can't be done. And then they prepare for the end. I'm telling you they do. And they sure as hell will not come out to vote Republican in November 2018. They will not come out to vote Republican in November 2018. Because there's nothing to vote for. There's no one to vote for. And it becomes an aspect of humiliation. As people have an abuse relationship with their government. The government has been abusing and pillaging and lying and exploiting and programming and propagandizing them for 150 years. Everyone's lifetime has lived under the shadow of control, of threatened brutality, and the slaves horizontally attack when the slaves vertically don't. It's a symbiotic relationship. And those people gave you not just a vote, but their last hope. You understand? Not just a vote. They gave you their last hope. And if you fail them, they will not come back out. Now the left, the Democrats, they're energized, they're pumped, they're ready. They can't stand you being in office, and they will do almost anything to rid you of the anxiety that they project onto you and the depression and the horror that they project onto you. They'll vote you out just so that they can reclaim their greed, so that they can reclaim what they think of as their sanity. So they're energized and they're coming in. If your base is betrayed, as they already relatively feel, no prosecution of bad people, only, it seems, endless witch hunts against good people. No wall. No control over immigration. No DACA repeal. But until now, no new war. Now, isn't this the saddest thing that you can imagine? Isn't this the saddest thing that you can imagine? But the best that voters in the West can hope for is no new war. No new war. 7 lashes a day, okay. Please, can I not have 8? That's where people are at. And if you betray them on this, they will not come out to vote for you. And they will not come out to vote for the Republicans. You were their weapon against the traditional portrayals of the Republican Party, who are the most corrupt in history because they know the good and portray the good while delivering the evil consistently and constantly. At least the left doesn't pretend. They say what they want. Control, subjugation, an end to the First and Second Amendment, an end to the Fourth Amendment for sure. So, the Democrats will come out to vote for the Democrats, but your base will not come out to vote for you in the midterms. And then the day after, impeachment proceedings will begin, and they will either succeed or fail, but it doesn't really matter. Because you will go down as the most shameful president in U.S. history, because you were given the greatest mandate and promised the most change and delivered the most status quo that can be imagined. Because of what was promised. If you go to war in Syria, you are openly broadcasting that you don't want a second term, and you would really love to spend the last 2 years of your first term fighting impeachment proceedings and getting virtually nothing done. and nobody will come to work for you. I mean, that's part of the point, right? Part of the point of raiding your personal lawyer's offices is to make sure that nobody wants to represent you illegally. Because if their offices get raided, then all their other clients' secrets may end up in the hands of the FBI. Attorney-client privilege means nothing, so lawyers aren't going to want to represent you. So they stripped people who might want to work from you by constantly harassing and attacking them for this imagined Russia collusion, and so good, decent people are getting destroyed. The fact that you didn't stand up for Flynn, as you should have, is now why you're being targeted. The time to stop a fire is when it is small, not huge. So, if you fail, your presidency fails, and people will batten down their hatches, buy their gear, move out of the cities, and prepare for the inevitable. And I really, really hate that there's a system that it comes down to one man, one day, one decision. And I hate perhaps even more that I have to beg. That I have to beg for my life. For the life of those I love. You'll be fine, you'll be safe. Churchill would have been airlifted out to the States if the Battle of Britain had been lost. You and the elites, you'll be fine. Like a bad woman always lands on her back, you guys will find a way to survive. You'll flee. You'll hide. You'll retreat to your walls, your gated communities. You won't have any trouble building a wall around your communities because you would not build a wall around your countries. And I hate that I have to beg. And I hate that I have to beg one man from a distance for what is so necessary. This time the elites will not escape. This time the elites will not survive. Historically, that has generally been the case. I don't think it will be the case now. So I am going to beg. Also on behalf of the people who don't have my reach, my audience, my eloquence, I am going to beg for them as well. They deserve their freedoms. They deserve what their ancestors fought and died to hand to them. They deserve peace. They deserve peace. There is no need to fight in the Middle East. If Israel wants its wars, Israel should fight its wars. This is not complicated. If Saudi Arabia wants its wars, Saudi Arabia must fight its wars. It's not complicated. The Middle East is not a laboratory for you horrifying people to test your latest weaponry on. These are human beings. And I beg for them too. I beg for my child. I beg for my child. I beg for their children. I beg even for your grandchildren. Don't do this. Don't do this. You stand with your sword grazing the bottom of a giant cloud. And inside the cloud is blood, and bones, and death. Do not cut the cloud. Do not open us up to this. Do not end it all. If you cut after us comes the deluge.
We are live on the Alex Jones Show, on the verge of what looks like another disastrous military intervention into the Middle East, not just on behalf of America, but other Western nations too. Steve Herman, White House bureau chief with VOA, tweets further indications just now from French President Emmanuel Macron and the Saudi Crown Prince that a multinational military action is being planned to respond to the latest reported chemical weapons attack against civilians in Syria. Also, Macron said if strikes are launched in Syria, they will target the chemical weapons capabilities of the Assad regime. Wait a sec, I thought they gave up the chemical weapons. I thought that's why we didn't do this back in 2013. We also have destroyers steaming their way towards Syria right now. The U.S. Navy destroyer USS Donald Cook is already in the region. As of yesterday, it's equipped with 60 Tomahawk cruise missiles. We also have this headline: U.S. missile destroyer reportedly sailing towards Syria as Trump weighs options. And we have a 7-warship strike group with cruise missiles on its way to the Mediterranean. That is the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, but they're saying that's not going to reach Syria until April 22nd, which is in 12 days' time. So it's pretty bizarre how, if this is supposed to be a quick, rapid response strike, they're allowing Syria to prepare for it, make maneuvers, get certain things out of the way. So could they be waiting for a massive strike, which includes Saudi Arabia, France, the UK, all these different countries? If so, it's going to be very different from what happened last year, when, of course, they basically just did one symbolic strike on an air base. Not very many people died, not very much damage was done. It was a symbolic act. It was pretty pointless. This looks like it could be something way bigger, that they may take a little more time to arrange it, at least in terms of an international alliance. Now, to talk about all this, we're joined by Syrian girl Maram Al-Susli, who, of course, is a regular contributor for Infowars.com. She is a geopolitical analyst for New Eastern Outlook. And she put out a video a couple of days ago called What Really Happened? Chemical Attack That Led to Missile Strikes on Syria. And she's here to talk about it now. Maram, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Now, let's get into the background of this, because, you know, unlike the Trump administration, it seems, unlike President Macron, unlike Saudi Arabia, we're not just going to have a flippant, reckless reaction, not knowing any of the evidence. Let's actually look at what could have possibly happened in this town, both before and after when this chemical attack happened. What was the situation in the town of Douma before this alleged attack happened? Was there any kind of battlefield or strategic motive for the Syrian army to launch this attack? What was the situation on the ground before it happened?
No, there wasn't. And it's exactly as you said. You know, Douma is a suburb that's part of a bigger suburb called Ghouta. Now, the insurgents that controlled Ghouta, which were Al-Qaeda linked, by the way, and the US, even in the United Nations, agreed that Al-Qaeda was controlling this city. The majority of them actually surrendered and had already given up their weapons or taken a bus ride to another town called Idlib. So the only group that hadn't surrendered was this group called the Islamic Army, or Jaish al-Islam. And the reason they didn't surrender and they controlled Douma is because they had leverage in the form of hostages, civilian hostages that they had kidnapped from nearby pro-Assad towns. And these are the wives and children of basically Syrian soldiers. And these civilians, they took them and they put them in cages in about 2015, and they paraded them around Douma and said that, you know,
these are the moderates. These are the moderates that put people in cages and parade them around. In fact, I've seen the video clips of that, parading them around in cages. They had another video which you play, which there was one of the victims. They made them walk through like underground tunnels, and they look very distressed. We're playing some of that footage now of them in the cages. So this group, this Army of Islam, that they were the remaining factions who refused to surrender, because as far as I understand it, the other rebels had agreed, right, with the Syrians that they would leave within 48 hours for these other rebel-controlled areas, and they would get out of Douma. But you're saying they had these hostages. Were those hostages amongst the victims in this attack, do you think?
I think so. I mean, the part of the negotiations, which did go through in the end, was that they have to release the hostages. And the number of hostages was 4,000, except only 200 of the hostages actually came out alive. So what happened to the other 3,800? The thing is that the reason they put them in cages was because they were using them as human shields. You're playing the video now of the civilians in the tunnels. They actually released that video 2 weeks ago as a sort of evidence to the government that they still have the hostages are still alive, so that they could get the negotiations going. This group, Army of Islam, is actually supported and funded by Saudi Arabia. And it's interesting because if you see the timing of this chemical attack, first of all, Trump said he wants troops out of Syria. Now, why would Assad use chemical weapons if it looked like the US was finally about to just leave and let him take back the entire country? It's exactly the same scenario that played out last year when the US State Department, almost a year to the day of this attack, the US State Department said that regime change is no longer the objective, and now basically and then a week later a chemical attack happened and regime change went back on the objective. And the interesting thing about Trump's statement is that after he said he wants to pull troops out of Syria, a few days later he said that if Saudi Arabia wants US troops to stay in Syria, they're going to have to pay for it. And of course, Saudi Arabia pays money to this Islamic army group that's controlling Douma, and these are the people that conducted the false flag chemical attack. So basically, this was Saudi Arabia's way of, keeping the U.S. in Syria, because basically they had negotiations with the U.S. and the Kurds in the northeast of the country, and they were basically given control over the northeast of the country. So Saudi Arabia thinks it owns the northeast of Syria. And what does the US get out of this? It's not really Saudi Arabia that's running the show, and it's not Saudi money either, because even though the northeast of Syria is full of oil and majority of Syrian oil is there, the US doesn't really need any more oil. The amount of oil that Syria has is nothing compared to the amount of oil that the US has. The point is that they don't want Syrians to have that oil. They don't want Syria to be able to rebuild and become strong again. And why is that? Well, Tucker Carlson asked that question on his show to Senator Roger Wicker, and he said it was because it was in the interest of Israel.
So you're saying that it's basically a conspiracy between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We've now got Saudi Arabia announcing they're going to join the strikes with France. Now, I want to flash back to this, and we'll get more into this after the break. There's a headline up on Newsweek, that famous right-wing publication. Now Mattis admits there was no evidence Assad used poison gas on his people. That's literally the headline. This came out in February. Nobody really paid much attention to it. This is about the strike that happened last year, which was, of course, we were told, beyond any shadow of a doubt, it was Assad that carried out the strike in April last year. Now they admitted back in February, listen to this, lost in the hyper-politicized hullabaloo surrounding the Nunes Memorandum and the Steele dossier was a striking statement by Secretary of Defense James Mattis that the US has, quote, no evidence, that's his words, no evidence that the Syrian government used the banned nerve agent sarin gas against its own people. This assertion flies in the face of the White House NSC memorandum, which was rapidly produced, again with no investigation, and declassified to justify an American Tomahawk missile strike against the Shayrat air base in Syria. So they were the exact same situation again. There's no independent investigation. Oh, but it must have been Assad, right? Who else could it be? Well, no, you got it completely wrong the last time out. You lied to the American people. You lied to the world. And we're heading into something even bigger now. This could lead to absolute chaos. And we're just sleepwalking into it once again. Nobody seems to care. We'll get more into it after the break with Syrian Girl. This is the Alex Jones Show Live. Don't go away. So we have the USS Donald Cook destroyer, armed with 60 Tomahawk missiles, just 100 kilometers from the Russian naval base of Tartus in Syria. We have Russian jets reportedly harassing that US destroyer. And now we have this, and I just tweeted this out on my Prison Planet Twitter account at Perez. Senior Russian lawmaker, US strike on Syria could trigger direct military clash with Russia. Oh joy. Senior Russian lawmaker says US strike could trigger direct military clash with Russia. This is Vladimir Shamanov, a retired general who heads the Defense Affairs Committee in the lower house of Parliament, who said in televised remarks today that a US strike in Russia could hurt Russian servicemen and trigger Russian retaliation. Oh, gee, a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Got that to look forward to by the looks of it. He said that Russia has the necessary means for that, and the Americans and their allies know that quite well. Now, you've seen massive movement of Russian aircraft, Russian naval facilities over the past 24 hours. Now they're saying if there's a direct confrontation, Russia could well retaliate. Shamanov emphasized that a retaliatory Russian strike could target US Navy ships and aircraft, of which there are going to be plenty in the region, or at least within the next few days. He added that the use of nuclear weapons is unlikely. Oh, thanks. Be thankful for small mercies there. We're joined by Syrian Girl to talk about this. Now, I want to get back into the specifics of the actual chemical weapons attack, but just touching on that for a second. You've got Russian ex-retired generals saying if there's a confrontation, Russia could attack US warships, could literally bomb US warships. We've got Russian fighter jets harassing, doing flybys of US destroyers in the region near the Russian naval base in Tartus. Do you think this is just rhetoric, or could we actually be seeing the potential for direct conflict between the US and Russia that could lead to a wider war? What's the risk here?
I think, it's a game of chicken, obviously, it's brinkmanship. But at the same time, even a game of chicken can end up with a hot war. And I think that's very likely. I mean, Russia has invested a lot. A lot of its troops are all over Syria. They're inside Syrian military bases. As you saw, Russian soldiers or security officers were killed by US bombs in the last strike on Syria. So those weren't directly Russian military, so perhaps because of that, there was a way out of a direct conflict there. But it's definitely, if the US is going to attack Syria, it is an attack on Russia. There's no doubt about that, and it will end up in a wider war. And they don't really seem to care about that because they think that they can intimidate and brinkmanship their way through by gathering, the UK, France, Saudi Arabia, this team of basically this mafia of thieves and criminals. And the fact that they're gathering these forces, I think, also doesn't bode well. As you said, it looks like it's not going to be one strike. It might be a sustained warfare, and we might see now the beginning of World War III. So it seems that the deep state has basically won, or is winning.
Well, of course, many people suggested that it could be the deep state pressuring Trump, saying, look, you want to prove you're not a Russian agent. You want the Mueller investigation to go away. And some people have suggested that this had a connection to the arrest of Cohen, his lawyer, yesterday, or the search of his files. This is how you do it. You strike a blow against Russia, give them a bloody nose, just to prove that you're not a Russian agent. Of course, you're going to risk World War III, but these people kind of like wars. It's kind of how they get by, how they make business. And as he said, doesn't look like it's going to be a single strike. That's what happened last time, based on, again, no evidence whatsoever. They moved all the aircraft out of the way, basically. They made a hole in the middle of an airfield that some people died, but it was by no means a massive attack. Now we got the Truman Carrier Strike Group and 7 warships with cruise missiles heading to the Mediterranean. They're not going to be there until 22nd of April. The French President Macron said they're going to wait 2 or 3 days before anything happens. So it looks like this is a build-up to something absolutely massive, at least way bigger than it was last year, given the kind of heavy artillery that's heading towards that region, or at least is promised to be heading towards that region, from the Saudis, from the UK, from France. And again, it's all based on absolutely nothing. This is the fundamental thing that angers me, the rush to war. There's no question whatsoever that this was a horrible incident, that people died. But there's been no investigation, and in fact, yesterday, the expert who was head of UN weapons inspection in Syria came out in Swedish media. This didn't get picked up anywhere. We picked it up in English language. He's called Åke Sällström. He said there was no possible benefit for Bashar al-Assad to gain in any way. He said it feels strange. They do not need it. Their tactics were already successful. And again, same situation as April 2017. Trump says they're pulling out, regime change off the table. Syria making gains, taking over new areas, defeating the rebels, and suddenly a convenient chemical weapons attack happens that brings down global condemnation. Do these people can they not even put two and two together at this point? Let's get back into it, though, because you mentioned the Army of Islam. This is one of the moderate groups. Okay, this is a group, correct me if I'm wrong, they're exterminating Shia Muslims, Alawites. They want Sharia law in Syria. They want to impose, in their own words, an Islamic state. They're taking hostages. They're putting them in cages, parading them around, putting them in tunnels. And these are the moderate rebels. These are the people who we're now talking about striking a country in support of, correct or not?
Well, absolutely. And this group, the hostages that they stole from the nearby towns, they include Alawites, Christians, and Sunnis. Basically, anyone that they perceive to be pro-government or has any relative that's working for the government was kidnapped, no matter their religion. But this group, they are related to Ahrar al-Sham, which is, of course, as you know, a group that is linked to Al-Qaeda. So it's like a 3 degrees of separation between them and Al-Qaeda. And of course, they're run by Saudi Arabia. So it's interesting, like, as you said, this looks like a massive strike. It's important to note that yesterday, Israel struck Syria. It struck T4 airbase. That airbase is specifically for the defense of Deir ez-Zor from ISIS. It basically manufactures the drones that attack ISIS in the area. And an ISIS offensive was launched in conjunction to that attack, as they probably always take advantage of it. So like, ISIS is still a problem, Al-Qaeda is still a problem, and all this is happening. And it's interesting that you might say that Israel is against Islamists and Al-Qaeda is against Israel's interests, but they've been giving Al-Qaeda medical treatment in the Golan Heights, and Israel and Saudi Arabia have the best relations now that they've ever had, because they both oppose Syria and Iran. In Saudi Arabia's case, it opposes Iran because they're Shiites, and that's it. That's the only reason. So I think that in this scenario, the chemical attack provides the best excuse for the deep state to keep the U.S. military in the northeast of Syria. And this comes a week after the first U.S. soldier died in Syria. This was a week ago. A US and a UK soldier were killed. And so this chemical attack is again timely because, of course, there's going to begin a discussion of why are the troops there and why are they dying. So there's that. And I wanted to just comment about Axel Sellström. Also what he said in 2013 in that very big chemical attack in Damascus. He said that it was very strange that attack happened on the same day that the OPCW had arrived. So you see, the OPCW didn't arrive after that attack. They arrived before that attack because they were there to investigate another incident in which chemical weapons were used in Aleppo against Syrian government soldiers and on a Syrian government-held area. That's what they were there to do. And on the date they arrived in Damascus, the chemical attack happened. So he said himself that he thought it was strange. And so there's been all of these coincidences that aren't really coincidences, as we know. But what's hypocritical and bizarre is that the U.S. government, some departments actually acknowledge that the rebels possess chemical weapons. Because if you were to look at the travel advisory to Syria that was released by the U.S. State Department, it said that beware, chemical weapons are being used by both sides. So they say one thing when it comes to the United Nations and when it comes to their people, and then on the other hand, they have something completely different when it comes to the travel warning.
Now, I want to get into this more because, of course, the only evidence that this entire plot, this insane plot of bombing the country is based on is unverified footage, basically from a group called the White Helmets. Let's get into the White Helmets and what they're all about. in the next segment, talking to Syrian Girl. This is the Alex Jones Show live, Infowars.com. We'll be back. We are live and we are into the 4th hour of the Alex Jones Show, talking to Syrian Girl. She is at Partisan Girl on Twitter. US destroyers basically right outside the Russian naval airbase. Retired Russian generals saying Russia could strike US ships, obviously creating a proxy war at the very least. Massive situation right now in Syria. It's going to spiral out of control if things continue heading the way they are, if cooler heads don't prevail. Now, I'm looking at a headline here from Reuters. This is out of Reuters, May 5th, 2013 headline. UN has testimony that Syrian rebels used sarin gas. UN human rights investigators have gathered testimony from casualties of Syria's civil war and medical staff, indicating that rebel forces have used the nerve agent sarin, one of the lead investigators said on Sunday. Now, this is Carla Del Ponte. She said this, quote, "Our investigators have been in neighboring countries interviewing victims, doctors, and field hospitals. And according to their report of last week, which I've seen, there are strong concrete suspicions, but not yet incontrovertible proof of the use of sarin gas from the way the victims were treated. This was used on the part of the opposition, the rebels, not by government authorities." That's the UN that said that 5 years ago. We have documented cases, 52 plus by the end of 2016 alone, of ISIS factions in Syria using chemical weapons. Oh, but who would believe that this attack could possibly have been a false flag, right? That's just off the planet thinking. And Maram, isn't it true, and this was in my video, that they discovered an actual rebel chemical weapons factory in this same region where this attack happened just a few weeks ago?
That's exactly right. As they were taking over new and new areas, they basically came across what seems like a chemical weapons lab filled with bottles full of chlorine. It was all filmed. The footage is online. You could see that the place was basically untouched except by rubble. And it's perfectly clear that anyone can make chemicals. I mean, these guys are making makeshift bombs. They have the capability. They've been making gas cylinder bombs for the last 5 years. And on top of which, I'm sure that they have help from intelligence agencies from many countries that have an interest to see this war continue. So it's who benefits and who has the means. It's the rebels and the security agencies that want the war to continue. And if you look at, who are the voices that are pushing for the war, it's coming from people like Tony Blair, who caused the Iraq war and
because he can be trusted on interventions in the Middle East, right? Tony Blair, he's got a perfect track record of foreign interventions in the Middle East. Let's all listen to him. That's a great idea, right?
Exactly, and he made his case for the Iraq war based on what? Chemical weapons, WMDs. It's almost like chemical weapons and WMDs is the only excuse that they have to start wars, either that or creating democracies. But it seems to be, used over and over and over again, and including with the Skripal case. What's interesting with this Skripal case, where they accused Russia of attempting to assassinate a ex-spy with a chemical weapon, is that just a day prior to this chemical attack, a story came out trying to link Syria to this assassination of a Russian spy in the UK. And they're trying to make a connection between Syria and Russia and chemical weapons. I don't know why it's always chemical weapons, but I think it has to do with the fact that a lot of the time, before they invade a country, they want to disarm it of chemical weapons.
Well, some people have also suggested, and in fact, I think it was Ackerson that said this, it would be difficult to investigate this attack because of the use of chlorine. The effects of it disappear rapidly in the victims. So maybe that's another reason why it's convenient to use this. We'll get more into it after the break with Syrian Girl, talk about the White Helmets, talk about where this is going geopolitically. This is the Alex Jones Show Live. We'll be back after the break. Breaking news at Infowars.com. Don't go away. We're going to do one more segment here. Maybe we'll stretch it into 2 segments with Syrian Girl, talking about the imminent attack on Syria is what it looks like. Here's a tweet from airlive.net. According to reports, British forces are mobilising at their bases in Cyprus, and Rafale fighter jets could take off from Saint Dizier Air Base in France for possible strikes against Syria. So it looks like it's not going to be this symbolic one strike that we had in April last year. Again, as a result of another chemical weapons attack, was completely unproven. Looks like this is a global effort. Could they actually be trying to still unseat a regime change in Syria, given how disastrous it was in Iraq, given how disastrous it was in Libya? We're talking to Syrian Girl right now. And the evidence for all this basically comes from one source. They said it was unverified footage, and then it was footage from the White Helmets from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. These are all groups completely aligned with the regime change agenda, completely aligned with rebel factions, in some cases aligned with actual ISIS factions. They have been from the very start. And this is the neutral independent group that we're supposed to believe as the complete impartial evidence on all this. Maram, tell us about the White Helmets. Can the White Helmets really be trusted?
Well, the White Helmets are basically the Army of Islam or Al-Qaeda basically putting on a white helmet. That's all it is. The group has been filmed waving Al-Qaeda flags at an Al-Qaeda rally, carrying weapons, torturing Syrian soldiers, holding up severed heads of Syrian soldiers, and faking video footage multiple times of chemical attacks and rescuing children and rescuing each other. They did a very silly video of themselves basically frozen in time rescuing this guy, and later he comes out and he's like, oh, I'm fine, but his acting during the rescue was as if though he was very much in pain and very used to acting. I mean, it's no wonder they won an Oscar, isn't it? So it's all because they act. And who runs this group? Who invented it? Who gave Al-Qaeda these white helmets? Well, it's an MI6 agent named James LeMessurier. And of course, the group is funded by Holland, the US, the UK. And it's interesting that Holland actually at the United Nations said, oh, this is a very trustworthy group. Well, of course they'd say that because they're the ones who are paying them. So, you know, again, like this video that came out, there's no way to verify whether it happened yesterday or last year or 6 months ago. There's no date on it. There's been no bodies that came out. I mean, the group actually surrendered Duma. The Russians are completely in Duma, and there's nothing to show where these people died. The video did reveal, you know, the corpses were actually under the ground, and near them was a gas burning stove. And if you're burning wood under the ground, you know, it doesn't even have to be sarin, it doesn't even have to be chlorine. It could be something as simple as carbon monoxide. You know, it's unfortunate that they chose basically to kill children because they can't fight back, and they make the best false flag imagery. And what would Assad benefit from gassing kids if it's going to basically spark World War III?
Oh no, it's just the sheer number of, the lack of number of people who are asking that question in the mainstream media. It's just so obviously not in his favor to do this when they were clearing out the region of Eastern Ghouta. Absolutely incredible. People just aren't asking the question though. Now we've got this potential for this war to explode. We've got all these different countries getting involved. We've also got the wider propaganda war, which is being fought obviously on the internet. We had a poll yesterday, a Fox News poll, and I voted in this poll. I retweeted this poll. It was consistently throughout the day 65% against military intervention in Syria throughout the whole day. Then in like the final few hours of this poll being active, it suddenly flipped. Now, what happened with that poll?
Well, there's this guy that is basically a journalist for the Muslim Brotherhood, who has 500,000 followers on Twitter, and he tweeted this poll and said, "Guys, vote yes for war against Syria." And after he tweeted that, there was a massive surge of like 80,000 votes within a span of 1 to 2 hours. And even though his tweet, you know, had a large retweet number, like 1,000 favorites, 500 retweets. I don't think that by itself would have been enough. I would hazard a guess that they used bots. So this is supposed to be a poll for Fox News viewers, and you're having the Muslim Brotherhood come in and vote for war. And isn't it interesting that the neocons are on the side of what the Muslim Brotherhood wants? John McCain and the neocon Republicans are all now on the same side of Al-Qaeda.
And they have been for the past 6 years since we've been talking about this. Okay, let's wrap it up. Just final comments. Where do you see this going? I mean, do you see it as a limited strike, as kind of a symbolic thing like we saw last year? Or do you see them actually, even at this late stage, still trying this regime change effort? Where do you see this going in the medium and long term?
I think, you know, it's very difficult because the emotions are running high right now. But I think what the U.S. wants is somehow to remain in the northeast of Syria for a prolonged period of time. Perhaps this intimidation tactic is an attempt to get some kind of negotiations towards that. Maybe it'll be a small strike, but I would say that we shouldn't treat it as that, because a small strike is still a strike. I mean, there's been consistent strikes and degradation of Syrian defenses and the strengthening of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the perpetuation of the war, the creation of refugees. It's not in anyone's interest. So we should treat this as though it is going to be a big strike and as though it might trigger World War III, because it might do that. And if we don't treat it as such and we don't act now, we may live to regret the day. So I would say that if you can, you know, call your local governments, call the White House, do whatever you can, what is in your power to try to resist and show opposition to this. It might not work, because I hazard a guess that the U.S. deep state, you know, the democracy is basically dead. But it's, you know, it's better than nothing, and we have to do what we can with the limited power that we have. So let's stand against this, because there's a 50-50 chance it's going to be World War III.
Amazing. Matt, just tell people in the final minute here how they can find you on social media and on YouTube.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. Find me at Partisan Girl on Twitter and Syrian Girl Partisan on YouTube. I'm also on BitChute Syrian Girl, and on Minds Syrian Girl or Partisan Girl, and a bunch of other things. So please check out my Twitter and add me on those.
Okay, we really appreciate you, Syrian Girl. We'll get you back on as this unfolds, which it inevitably will over the next few days, maybe even starting tonight. But thanks for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, there goes Syrian Girl. We have about a minute and a half left in this segment, so let's go back to this news again. Massive headline out of Haaretz. Senior Russian lawmaker, U.S. strike on Syria could trigger direct military clash with Russia. He's basically saying, he's emphasizing that a retaliatory Russian strike could target U.S. Navy ships and aircraft. He's saying that Russia could bomb U.S. Navy destroyers if they target Syrian government positions. That is absolutely massive. We also have Trump cancelling his trip to South Africa. President Trump has cancelled his scheduled trip to multiple South American countries originally planned for this week, the White House said Tuesday. So Trump's going to be in place. He was set to attend the 8th Summit of the Americas in Lima, Peru, and then go to Colombia. He's not going to do that because he's got things on his plate, and we all know what they are. We have report Russia jams U.S. drones over Syria to thwart airstrikes. The Russian military has figured out how to jam some U.S. military drones in airspace over Syria, NBC News report on Tuesday. So the Russians are very busy boys right now as this potential World War III scenario escalates. Really not that many people are talking about it until it happens. There doesn't seem to be as much interest around it, as much concern around it as there should be right now. Absolutely incredible times we're living in. This is the Alex Jones Show Live. We'll be back after the break. Breaking news at Infowars.com. Don't go away.
You know, I've got some talking points here about Caveman from InfoWarsLive.com. But instead of going with those talking points, let me just give you what I've experienced personally. From all the wives' tales in every culture, we know bones have essence. We know chicken noodle soup is great for people that are sick. Again, in every culture, this has been reported because it works. And there's no way to quantify how strong this is. The amount of bone protein amount of marrow and the amount of concentrated life force that is in this is incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, whether it's for your joints, whether it's for your arteries and your veins, whether it's for your brain, whether it's for energy, this, ladies and gentlemen, is the strongest, most concentrated bone broth formula out there, and it's amazing. Find out for yourself today at InfoWarsStore.com. For your family, and again, I want to thank you all for your support. You are funding the information war in 2018.